There we go.
Yeah.
Well, the most interesting project that I worked on, of course, was the neutron physics, the subject of my thesis, which was resonance absorption of neutrons in nuclear reactors. But Alvin permitted us, if we could arrange it, to move within the laboratory. And so after working for 10 years in neutron physics and having exhausted my own inspiration, not the field, that would be absurd to think that, but I had gotten to the point where I couldn't think of anything new or inventive. And just at that time, there was a water desalting project that needed someone who was skilled in computation. And they asked for me, and Alvin said, okay. And so I did that. That was the way in which I got to Israel, because ultimately I made enough of a reputation for myself that I was able to win a Fulbright to go to Israel to do water desalting by reverse osmosis, I should add. And when I got back, I discovered that Eugene Vigna, with Alvin's concurrence, had established a small civil defense program here. And I wanted very much to work for Eugene, because I had had very little contact with him while I was doing my thesis, and all of that was anyway through the mail. And I thought it more appropriate that one ought to know his major professor in a more personal way, and he was a golden opportunity to work for him. And so I took advantage of Alvin's gentle good nature, and I nagged him a little bit. It wasn't really necessary to nag him very much, and he said, yes, go ahead. And the years that I worked in the civil defense program, together with Dr. Conrad Chester, who was a good friend of mine, those were some of the most productive years that I had at the laboratory. And I suppose I would have continued in that field of supersonic flow and shock waves if the money hadn't run out, which it did. And so at that point, I joined a superconductivity project at the laboratory. Again, well, Alvin had departed, but this was with, I guess, Herman Postma was director by that time. He allowed me to do that. But the laboratory and the principles along which it ran were largely Alvin's creation, I think. Certainly at that time, perhaps not today anymore, but at that time they were. And he allowed and perhaps encouraged people to move if they could contribute more to the place that they moved to than they could in the place that they presently were. And so I was able to move into the applied superconductivity business. That turned after several years from a domestic program to an international program called the Large Coil Program, and ultimately resulted in my being invited to spend a year in Japan. And I do think that in a way, Alvin was responsible for that too. He certainly had plowed the ground that allowed that to grow. So
Very nice. Very nice. That's great. That's